Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 15th of March 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to say we're going to be joined by Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches with a report on the unrest in Holland. Alex will be joined by another colleague to give you an accurate update of what's been happening.
Well, let's just see if Faust is there. Are you there, Faust? I know we've got some internet connection problems here, but are you there?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes. Okay. We haven't got much video, but we can hear you quite well. Okay. So let's begin. Obviously, there was trouble over the weekend with over the Turkish Consulate General's remarks. How many rioters did you see around the consulate, and did the police manage to contain the disorder?
Well, I arrived there at about 12:30. I think that was probably the peak of the commotion. What I saw was at least 1,000 people on foot and probably around 100 cars driving circles around the city center. So I'd say 1,100 minimum, probably more. As for the police, they did not have control of the situation until about 2 o'clock. They had to send in reinforcements. While I arrived there were constant buses bringing in reinforcements until there were about 100 police, about 20 mounted, 60 on foot, and another 20 or so in the cars. They managed to regain control of the central square, which stopped the flow of the cars, which were honking and flying Turkish flags over the place. And it took them about half an hour after that to disperse the Turks. But the Turks, they remained throughout the city center in small groups. While I was cycling home, they were everywhere in small clumps.
And did you see any evidence of organisation on the Turkish side? And there's some suggestion that there were police-style checkpoints.
There were. The police tried to control the crossings and the main roads to the highways and the bridges in order to stop the flow of cars honking and trying to disrupt the flow of traffic. Other than that, I did not see any evidence of organization on the Turkish side. It was quite chaotic. There was just a big consensus on what to say. They were all shouting the same things, pro-Erdogan slogans, Allahu Akbar. They were all flying Turkish flags, but I didn't see any leaders or anything like that.
And what about any Turks from Belgium or Germany?
I spoke to two of them who had a very heavy Belgian accent, and when I asked, they did say they had come from Belgium. And they were there to defend the democratic rights of their fellow Turks. I did not see any Germans there at the time, but I have heard that there were any there, yes.
And did you see anyone that you knew?
Yes, I was a social worker in Rotterdam for about 2 years, and I spoke to a few kids, which I had helped at the time for about 2 years. I coached them to get jobs and so on. And I addressed them and I asked what they were doing there, and they were like, well, look, we have to do this. It's for our democratic rights. We're being oppressed by the Dutch government. I just couldn't talk them out of that position.
Okay, and does that make you change your mind about the political situation in Holland?
No, because I've always been quite right-wing. So I voted Forum for Democracy just now, which is sort of like the PVV. But I do hope Wilders becomes the biggest party today.
Okay, and what do you think Erdogan's up to at the moment?
I think he's in a way he's showing his power, but he's also trying to get the Turks in Europe to support him, and it's also an excuse probably to drop the refugee deal, since that is putting a lot of burden on the Turkish economy at the moment.
Yeah, and well, the Moroccan mayor of Rotterdam, who I believe is also a Bilderberg attendee, has accused the Turkish Consul General of shamefully lying to him. During Saturday about the events that were planned for the evening. What did he mean about decoy convoys being arranged to fool the Dutch police?
Well, I'm pretty sure that actually did happen, but I don't know if it was organized by the Consul General. I think that was more of an ad hoc thing. You can say one thing for the Turks here is that they're quite energetic and they take the initiative. So I saw that sort of thing happen, police being hounded by Turks in cars. but I don't think it came from any sort of central authority.
Okay. Okay. Well, look. Thank you very much for that report. Now, look, I've got an article here from the Telegraph. The headline is "Turkey says Holland responsible for Srebrenica massacre as diplomatic row continues." And what the article's saying is that the Turkish president Erdogan has said that he holds the Dutch responsible for the 1995 massacre of 8,000 Bosnian Muslims in Srebrenica as he continued a days-long tirade against Holland. And the quote is from Erdogan is, "We know the Netherlands and the Dutch from the Srebrenica massacre. We know how rotten their character is from their massacre of 8,000 Bosnians there." So Alex thought perhaps you might like to say something about that. I know I'm maybe dropping this on you from a great height, but
what can I say? What can I say? The International Court of Justice has determined that the Dutch troops in Srebrenica were negligent in their duties. I think they did not do their job to the best of their ability. Soldiers should follow orders. They should have fought, but there was no chance of winning. And whether we would have fought or not, the Bosnians there would have been massacred anyway, because the Serbs outnumbered the Dutch bat there by a factor of about 8-1. So it would have been no chance.
Yeah, Alex, let me bring you in here. What are your thoughts on this story?
Well, this goes back to the mid-90s, and for those too young to remember or who weren't interested in politics, Srebrenica is this town in eastern Bosnia where a large number of Bosniaks, so Muslims among the white population of Bosnia, were herded together by the Serbs. The Serbs did a lot of nasty things in that war, there's no doubting it. But if you look at the footage of the time, there's this famous shot of Milosevic, who's basically cornered the commander of the Dutch battalion, Dutch Bat, there, and he's forcing him to drink some kind of Slivovic toast to the brotherhood of the Serbs and the Dutch, while the Serbs rounded up the Muslims. I think that the roundup of the magic number is 8,000, isn't it? I think the roundup and the massacre did happen. But the thing is that the general who's actually had to answer to court and parliament in the Netherlands about this, I think his name was Karamans. He had an unquiet retirement, but he had a poisoned chalice, basically, because his men were ordered to fight against overwhelming odds. And then we get into questions of who in the Clinton era and in the US and NATO apparatus wanted to see a massacre happen. I think that what we're seeing now with the Turkish contingent in Europe is writ large what was planned in the Balkans a generation ago in the 90s, which is the idea of using the sob story of Muslim refugees and nasty right-wing Europeans as a way of setting us against each other.
Yes. Any thoughts?
Well, I think the truth's coming to the surface, isn't it? We're getting more and more of the picture as we see the types of people that have created the mass migration. And as UK Column has consistently said, don't focus on the immigrants themselves. What we've got to look is who has created this mass migration of people and what their true political agenda was. And I think you're spot on, Alex, that a key part of that agenda was to create pressure and unrest in Western societies in order to drive other social change.
Well, look, we're going to come back onto the subject of immigration a little later. I just want to say thank you very much, Faust, for joining us. Have you got any closing remarks before we move on from this section?
Well, Srebrenica, they did only shoot the men, so there's that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Now, Alex, GCHQ, this is quite an interesting story. Judge Andrew Napolitano he's obviously the Fox News senior judicial analyst, and he was commenting on Fox News yesterday, saying that basically the Obama administration, or in the closing days of the Obama administration, that they were spying on Donald Trump and the people around him. But the key point is here that they were not using their own intelligence agencies to do so. They were using GCHQ. This is the allegation. So Fox News, through Napolitano, is saying that 3 senior U.S. intelligence officials have told him that Obama used GCHQ to spy on Donald Trump. And the quote is that 3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News that President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA. He didn't use the CIA. He didn't use the FBI. He didn't use the Department of Justice. Instead, he used GCHQ. And Napolitano said there are no American fingerprints on this. What happened to the guy who ordered this? Well, he resigned 3 days after Donald Trump was inaugurated. Now, Reuters had a comment on this morning. They said that a UK spy agency did not eavesdrop on Donald Trump during and after last year's US presidential election. And this is according to a British security official who denies the allegations by a US television analyst. And they say that the official, who is familiar with British government policy and security operations, told Reuters that the charge made no sense, that it was totally untrue and, quite frankly, absurd. Now, what really staggered me, Alex, was that, well, here we have Google News, and we look, and I did a search for the quote from Napolitano himself, and also did a search based on Trump, Obama, and GCHQ, and there is no mainstream coverage in Britain of this allegation whatsoever. And bearing in mind how much coverage of Trump there has been in the mainstream press in the last weeks and months, I've got to ask why not. And has there a D notice been placed on this story? If a D notice has been placed on this story, this has got to lend some weight to the allegation, does it not?
I think it would, Mike, and there's some question as to what forms D notices take these days. 2 or 3 years ago, if my memory doesn't fail me, maybe a little longer, there was some rumour or semi-official story, rumint, as intelligence officers sometimes call it, that D notices had been superseded. But there's many ways to bring them about. Let's not forget D notices are in effect a gentleman's agreement, or maybe an iron fist in a velvet glove threat to editors. You know, don't do this. It's more trouble than it's worth for you. So that could have happened. Besides, GCHQ, being in a European Union member state, is perfectly at liberty to tell Google to suppress results on the basis that it has legal personality and an entitlement to so-called privacy. That could all have happened. You know, to take Napolitano's claim to himself, he's a good man. He's got good libertarian classical convictions. So he sits more or less in the middle of where UK column viewers would sit, somewhere between the complete libertarian and the more constitutional conservative position. He's made some very good rulings in his time. He's clearly not an intelligence expert, because he's talking about things like the NSA database, whereas anyone knows there's hundreds and hundreds of them. But it is true that GCHQ shares access with NSA on almost all databases. And it depends on what we mean by spying here. Could it have been that GCHQ or someone in GCHQ was prevailed upon, as has happened in the past, to my knowledge, to do a quick and dirty search of a database for raw intercept, or even for metadata, just who you were calling and who you were texting without the content? That, I think, is quite possible. It is also within the bounds of possibility, though less likely, that someone at GCHQ found calls with Trump to foreign numbers, which would then have been justifiable outside the UK and the Five Eyes community, and wrote up a semi-official report. In the Cold War, there were cases of UK and US officials calling third parties of interest, and the resulting transcripts didn't go in any database. They went in a brown envelope to your own side's government, really, to honour the agreement between the UK and the US. So there is all kinds of possibilities here. Napolitano is quite a credible man, and if he says he's got 3 senior intelligence sources, then I think there is some weight to this.
I think a bit we could add to this, Alex, is back in August 2013, The Guardian had a headline which was that the NSA had paid GCHQ 100 million. And the inference of the article, based on Snowden material, was, of course, that the Americans regarded GCHQ as a soft touch if they needed a little bit of assistance or a favour. So although it's another Snowden-based article, the Guardian report there back in 2013 again seems to support the idea that this is perfectly possible.
Any thoughts?
Yes. I think everything and anything is possible these days. The quality and reliability of GCHQ officers used to be extremely high. Many of them are still very good, conscientious people. Very few have legal awareness. They're very good on what GCHQ would call legalities, honouring, that what you're told is the be-all and end-all of the law. In other words, the wording of orders from ministers or executive orders in the States. What GCHQ officers are not so aware of is the wider picture of the Constitution, and basically good old-fashioned right and wrong tends to get lost in the woodwork with all the legalities training you get. And I think the newer officers, and not just all the young ones either, but the ones coming in mid-career from who knows where, like the chap you mentioned yesterday, Mike, at a quite senior level, I'm not sure that they are traditional civil servant material, and I'm not sure that they have much compunction.
Just one final point on this, then, Alex. I think perhaps this needs to be seen in the context of the fact that the Obama, obviously regime isn't the right word because he's not president anymore, but the infrastructure around Obama, which got him elected in the last two elections, is really behind the anti-Trump movement in the United States at the moment. And I'm not saying that there was definitely something illegal had happened here, but perhaps we've got to see it in that context.
Yes, I mean, to bring it to a geographic focus, I think you could say, Mike, that we don't need to look at Washington to Cheltenham links so much as we need to look at Chicago to Europe links. People, including Sibel Edmonds, have put their finger on this, that Chicago and Obama's Democrat Party network there is a nest of all kinds of evil. And the mechanisms used there are the very dirtiest ones that we're well aware of. And their network tends to run through NATO lines, has a lot to do with Turkey and Turks abroad, actually, another theme of our news today, which might sound not immediately relevant to UK-US intelligence relations, but you'd be surprised of where the loyalties lie of some of these key people and what skeletons they have in their closets. So I think that a sort of semi-private, semi-official order from the Obama machinery is quite a possible scenario here.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's come back to European matters then. Today, you've got an election running in Holland.
Yes, and we just heard Faust mention that he'd voted for a smaller version of the PVV, which is Geert Wilders' party. But you can see there that the PVV, the Freedom Party, which is anti-immigration and anti-EU membership, is roaring ahead. This is a good third up on the support they were being given a week ago in the polls before the weekend insurrection of the Turks. What I should point out about the first rolling footage you showed, the daylight footage of the Turks from a tweet, is that was happening during Saturday daytime, actually, that the Turks were revolting outside the Dutch consulate general in Istanbul before any of the evening events happened. So there does seem to have been some coordination from Turkey from the start. Or what's the dividend been? Geert Wilders has gone up to nearly 40 seats in the polls. Polling is brisk. It's a 150-seat parliament, by the way, so to get 40 seats is a massive showing in such a pluralist parliamentary scene as the Netherlands. And then the stragglers, the 5 or 6 behind him, are all kind of centrist, centre-left. They call themselves centre-right, a couple of them, but all centre-left or cultural Marxist parties that believe in unfettered immigration, no questions asked. And that there's a lot of interest in some urban areas, including among the native Dutch, in voting anyone but Wilders, because, of course, he stands to upset the apple cart and a lot of vested interests. But if the results is anything like the bar graph you just showed, we're going to have pretty much a shocker on our hands. So that'll become clear about midnight to 1 a.m. British time. I think the Dutch are quite quick at counting. But certainly polling just now in my local station was brisk, even at 9 o'clock in the morning. I think we're going to see a whopper of a turnout, and probably a bit of the Brexit and Trump factor. I'm hearing reports from friends in various cities that people are coming back from the polling station and whispering, "I voted Wilders," or Forum for Democracy, which is a kind of intellectual version of Wilders, but don't tell anyone. So a lot of that is happening.
So if I'm reading you right, you're almost suggesting that the activities over the weekend have helped to drive the vote today. And if that's the case, how much of what happened over the weekend do you think was organised to drive the vote in this direction? Is this something that we're seeing the establishment want because it gives them a lot of noise under which they can hide other activities?
I suspect that is exactly what has gone on, Mike. There's a symbiotic relationship between opposites here. If Wilders gets a high showing, then the Turkish party, it doesn't call itself that, but it calls itself DENK, but the new party, which split away from Dutch Labour to stand up for the Turks, is obviously going to do well as well as a kind of mirror image of Wilders. So the escalation in the rhetoric, it benefits both sides. You can see that's definitely happening, and a lot of things can be slipped under the radar while there is diplomatic fury in Europe as well. So, I mean, personally, I have to say I do not trust Wilders' motives. I think he does put his finger on a lot that is wrong with, shall we say, the Muslim community in Europe and certain problems they have. He doesn't look further into who caused the problems, who's bringing the Muslims here or bringing them into the frame of mind, which is the problem. He's massively pro-Israel, which is a big question mark. But I think that there's a lot of scope here for the rhetoric to have been whipped up quite deliberately. It allows the very poor showing and the poor results of the centrist parties to be swept under the carpet, because now the slogan is, vote for the same old boring centrist parties, because if you don't, you'll get that nasty man Wilders. You can see what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Let's move on to this now. In the top right-hand corner of the screen here, you can see the Facebook link for the person who's produced this little video. But we're just going to run through a little video, and you're going to discuss it as we do it, subtitled at the same time. But this is looking at the movement of people from Tunisia, actually, in this case, into Europe. Alex?
It is, although the claim is that they came from Tunisia into Europe, because these are ships which this chap, Luca D, has tracked using maritime radar tracking resources. He had to pay several thousand to get access to this database. And if you see, leaving the toe of Italy, Messina, these ships which claim to have picked people up in the Straits of Sicily, which is the narrowest point between Sicily and Tunisia, the top point of Tunisia, they were actually going straight down to off the Libyan coast, as you can see there, going nowhere near Tunisia, hanging off just outside Tripoli, picking up people and then going back, and then claiming all over the place on social media that with the taxpayer funding they'd been given, they were going off to rescue people in the Straits of Sicily, in that much narrower channel from Tunisia. And as the chap points out, under international law and maritime law, if you salvage someone from just off the coast of Libya, then you have to put them into the nearest port. In some cases, that's another port within Libya. And in many other cases, it would be Tunisia. But what they do is they bypass them, they go right past Malta, past the whole of Sicily, and land them back in Messina, so that they're then in the European Union.
And that, yes, that's what we're seeing on screen at the moment, is showing a track. I mean, it's obvious that this is a trade that's going on here.
Yeah, every time they put out to sea, they've got several thousand euros. I think sometimes several thousand euros per head. So this leads us into questions of who is profiting here. And we do hear that the refugees are drowning in their thousands now since the EU and naval operations got going. Where a lot more are drowning than before because of the rickety boats they're being put in. Well, you can see what happens. They're being put in these awful knackered tugboats and just being pushed gently off Tripoli because they know that the traffickers know that within a few hours, one of these NGO boats with EU funding or an EU naval asset in some cases is going to turn up and take them straight back, not to the nearest port, as by maritime law and international precedent, but no, straight back to Italy, so that they can all be ticketed as EU refugees.
And in this clip, the final question in the subtitle there is the most natural question which comes to each of us is why. What are your thoughts?
Because there's money in it. It's quite as simple as that, Mike. There is a lot of money in this trade. I've been at conferences for over a year now, in fact, 2 years, since before the migrant issue went live, because a lot of people in the various church backgrounds were getting concerned, people who had contacts in Africa itself. And it was being flagged up in early 2015 already. There's a lot of the people coming from Eritrea, which would be most of the people who end up on these boats in Libya and Tunisia. Most of them were actually unwilling to go to Europe. They had a subsistence life as farmers in Eritrea and Ethiopia. But in many cases, I was hearing eyewitnesses say that they had been forced, that the men had often been killed or abducted first, and the women and children were forced at gunpoint to march across the Sahara to the North African coast because they were already cash cows. So there is a lot of money in this at every stage. And then, of course, they find themselves in Italy. We hear that they've been rioting because their food's no good. And then news sources induce us to think that they're jolly ungrateful swine. But in fact, they are being given rotten and useless food because it's a question of bulk and profit, isn't it? If you give everyone really cheap, rotten food, then you're getting more of the taxpayer-funded money for saving these refugees goes into your own pockets. Yes. That seems to be what's going on.
Okay, let's have a look at this. This is a new book by Mario Giordano. It's in Italian. I presume it's not in English yet.
It's only been published a week ago today. But it's called Profugopoli, meaning migrant gate or migrant city. And it fingers the swindlers. And I'll read you the blurb, which I've translated from Italian. What do the following have in common? The company that organizes courses for bouncers and undertakers, and which is controlled from the notorious tax haven of Jersey. The ex-consultant from the southern Italian region of Campania, who together with immigrants cashes in to the tune of 24,000 euros a day and who drives a Ferrari, the French energy multinational, and the Archbishopric of Vibo Valentia in the heel of Italy? Answer: they are some of the entities active behind the big business of refugees. Millions and millions of taxpayer euros being managed by the Italian state on the pretext of there being a state of emergency. And in fact, any kind of control over this funding has been lost, so you end up with all kinds of pocketing going on, some more and some less salubrious. We often speak of welcome and solidarity, but we merely need to lift the veil of the immigration emergency to discover that behind the screen of do-goodery, it is basically business that's being carried on. Not always legitimate business either. Among those who welcome foreigners, in fact, there are adventuring chancers, latter-day wheeler dealers and speculators of all kinds. And there are also serious industries among them which have constructed economic empires on the desperation of others. Just consider that while 95% of Italian companies turn over less than 2 million a year, there are humble cooperatives that are somehow managing to make no less than 100 million, and others which within 12 months have increased their turnover by 178%. This book, Refugee City, is a river of money that brings power, thousands of jobs and no end of votes. And that is tempting to many because, as is well known, immigrants make more hay. But the impression is being formed that big mafia money, which so outraged us in Italy in recent decades, is only the beginning of this scandal. There is a big pot yet to be uncovered, which involves not only Rome but the whole of Italy. As the head of the National Anti-Corruption Authority, Raffaele Cantone, has said, I fear there is widespread abuse of the system. Widespread, yes, but how widespread? Read this book and you'll gain an idea. Refugee City is in fact a sneak preview of the scandals that are about to break and reveals what no one has yet revealed: suspicious cooperatives that inexplicably win contract after contract, shady characters, dubious loans, the incomprehensible behaviour of some local councils. How can one justify, for example, that in the northeast of Italy, public tenders are repeatedly being awarded to a cooperative in Modena chaired by a 22-year-old student, already flagged up for, quote, serious infringements, lack of transparency and false financial reporting? All scandals are inexcusable, but those who use the cloak of generous assistance are the worst. This needs to be condemned, first and foremost, out of respect for the many decent volunteers that there are. This book is dedicated to them, the people who day after day are reaching out to their neighbours without cashing in on it, people whose work must therefore not be sullied by those who have turned a warm welcome into a pig's trough. Because when volunteers seek to help others, they are doing so to secure a place in paradise, the real paradise, that is, not a tax paradise.
Yes. Look, I preempted a little bit by putting this one up early, because it's not just about the private interests that are making money here. The EU's up to no good as well, so they're opening migration centres, according to Breitbart here, in Africa, because Europe needs 6 million migrants. Well, the European Commission has a page on this under international cooperation and development. Now, of course, the point here, Alex, is that the way that Europe has permitted its economy to go, and the way Europe has an aging population of indigenous people, if you like, the political reality is, the economic reality is that there is young blood required, and that's perhaps one of the drivers for why people are being brought in these kinds of numbers, because otherwise governments are going to have to kill lots of elderly people as quickly as possible, because we simply can't afford to keep them alive. So the question is, how much of this is being driven, do you think, by private money interests, mafia type interests, and how much of it is being driven by what politicians have systematically done to national economies, which basically leaves us in a real difficult position with regard to how we care for our aging population?
It's much more the latter, Mike. It's the national policies and international policies. The trail of evidence is there, stretching back a century, as it was with eugenics and with Margaret Sanger and her Planned Parenthood. All the quotes are there from 100 years ago, talking about euthanizing the old and bringing in vigorous new blood and shaking up the gene pool. It's been the theme of sci-fi for over a century now. You'd be blind not to see it. But the motive is definitely there. that it's a political issue. All the mafia types are just really cashing in. But it's interesting that local councils in Italy are making inexplicable choices of whom they award tenders to. That sounds very much like what's going on in Britain.
Yes, okay. Poland then, Le Pen has offered to help Poland weaken the European Union. Now, the current Polish government, as we know, quite anti-EU when it suits them to be. They're quite pro-EU when Russia's involved. Certainly pro-NATO as well. But you've labelled this Polish government in a cleft stick. It's a cleft stick of their own making.
It is, because Poland was telling Britain before last week's vote on renewing Donald Tusk's office as President of the European Council that you'd better jolly well vote for someone other than Tusk if you want any help with us in the Brexit negotiations. So you can see all the blackmail angles coming back again. Tusk, of course, is completely politically opposed to the current Polish government, which is much more of a chauvinist right-wing government. And Kaczynski, as we've mentioned before, is still the ideologue pushing the Polish government. He's even actually prevailed on Poland to call Tusk back and have to testify on whether he allowed a deal with the Russian FSB, the intelligence agency, to go ahead on intelligence sharing. So you can see that the dynamics there. But anyway, Theresa May was in a bit of an unenviable position. The polls telling her, vote for anyone but Tusk. But apparently we absented ourselves from that vote, much to the annoyance of the polls, after which they said, well, we're going to work actively against the Tusk-chaired European Council because we know what Tusk is like and we don't want anything to do with it. So, of course, Le Pen jumps on this bandwagon and says, I will help you to dismantle the EU, which, of course, is pushing a sore spot because the Poles want the EU and NATO there so that they can continue to beat the Russians with a big stick. Someone else's stick, of course, not their own.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, Alex, just a brief comment. But, of course, Tusk was supposed to be on the plane that flew to Smolensk for the Katyn memorial. The plane that crashed on the way, just as it was attempting to land. Bit of a coincidence that Tusk didn't turn up on that aircraft because, of course, the rest of the Polish establishment was on it. And Kaczynski has never really forgiven him, actually. So,
no.
How much of this do you think is actually Poland upset with the EU, and how much of it is a personal vendetta against Tusk?
Well, I mean, as we discussed before, that the Poles are kind of the Irish or the Italians of Eastern Europe. They're, the big clannish Catholic vendetta-based society, and I think that that's exactly what's gone on. Is Kaczynski has sworn that by hook or by crook he'll have Tusk arraigned for trial by some means or other. And he thought that, I think the ideal opportunity for that was he thought that Theresa May had her arm behind her back because she was friendless in the Brexit negotiations. And he thought that if he could get Britain to vote against Tusk's renewal, then he would have his way. But it looks like May betrayed not just her own country, but also her only ally in the Brexit negotiations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to global leadership. The British Council is launching its Future Leaders Connect program. This is the global network for emerging policy leaders. They're saying Future Leaders Connect is where exceptional individuals aged between 18 and 35 from around the world join in a long-term network of emerging policy leaders. You will develop your policy-making expertise, make valuable connections, and gain the skills to have real impact. Together, you will discuss major global policy issues in the Houses of Parliament, engage with inspiring leaders, visit some of the UK's leading global institutions, and collaborate to produce innovative policy recommendations. The skills, experience, and connections you make through Future Leaders Connect will support you to seize your leadership potential. We're now accepting applications for individuals living in Indonesia, Kenya, Mexico, Morocco, Nigeria, Pakistan, Tunisia, and the UK. And they say that at the British Council, we're committed to developing future leaders to prepare the world ahead of us. The next generation of leaders must be skilled, innovative, and globally connected people, able to make and respond to change and effective policy making. Future Leaders Connect offers its members the opportunity to be part of a long-time worldwide network of emerging policy leaders. You will have the chance to discuss the biggest policy issues and so on. And they're talking about, well, it's a residential program, Brian, first of all. It's going to connect to the Houses of Parliament. It's going to connect to a long-term network of leaders around the globe. But of course, let's not forget the connections that the British Council has itself, because it is, of course, a partner of common purpose. It's a supporter of common purpose. And when we look at some of the people involved in this is just one example of people that are involved with the British Council, we find people taking CLOR leadership training and also common purpose leadership training. It's all the same type of networks, but what we're doing is now we're making them truly global networks. This is part of the Global Britain Initiative.
But of course, Mike, these are reframing networks. These are about taking people and literally reframing their minds in order that they should follow the path for the desired political agenda.
And taking young people in this case.
Young people, certainly. But of course, we've got to remember that young people of, say, 15 years ago, trained by Common Purpose, have now moved through into mid-ranking or more senior posts in government and the civil service. So this is getting very, very dangerous.
Alex, what are your thoughts on this type of initiative? Because this is really taking the the Common Purpose model and taking it global.
You know, Mike, I think this is just the cerebral equivalent of what the British establishment's done for 200 or 300 years, and which you've discussed in recent days as well, which is come up with a good wheeze for cornering other people's profitable and dynamic markets and making sure that they don't develop any further by imposing a few select British trainers and developers on the scene to make sure that things stay just as they are. And we've discussed this in many programs in the past with regard to the extractive industries, which seem to target and victimize resource-rich countries and claim to invest in them, in their resources in this case, and then bring them nowhere and don't actually connect the resources or train up people who are able to exploit them. The same seems to be happening now with the resources of the mind, which is the basis of the 21st century economy. We send in trainers through the British Council to teach British values and the English language and whatnot, and besides, you get the same with the immigrant story again. Lots of interpreters and language teachers and social workers, professions that I and Faust have worked in the past, so we know what we're talking about. And they really are just there to tread water, to receive taxpayer money, often now from international organisations, to keep these countries and the brains and resources they have in the status quo. It's a very invidious business model, really. It does no one any favours.
Yes.
And when you're talking about the British Council, we should remember also that a decade ago, Stephen Kinnock was, I think, the number 2, if not the head, of the British Council's work in Russia, and got himself arrested when the Russians were seeing what was going on.
Good point.
Certainly haven't forgotten that, because, of course, the Kinnocks were the first people that Julia Middleton ran to when she knew that members of the public, including UK Column, were starting to dig out exactly what was happening with Common Purpose.
Yeah.
Well, what I'd like to do is follow on from that lead, really, and come back onto this subject, mindfulness, that we brought up yesterday. We showed this graphic. This is the all-party mindfulness group in Parliament, which has been working to get mindfulness into health, education, the workplace, and the criminal justice system. Now, most people totally unaware of this. They set up the Mindful Initiative. It says it's a charity. Don't worry, we're independent, we're non-profit making. But the man we really need to pay attention is Lord Layard, because with his team, he is boasting that he's already trained, we say reframed, 115 parliamentarians and 80 staff by mindfulness. Now, I believe that figure relates to at least a year ago, so we can assume there's more. But this is the organisation. We're going to ask today for help from our viewers and listeners to get onto that parliamentary site, www.parliament.uk, have a look at the people involved, and if you're in their constituency, can you start asking questions? Well, this is the man himself, Lord Layard. He simply says he's London School of Economics and Political Science. As far as we can see, he's medically unqualified, particularly in the mental health field. But his main current interest is how better mental health could improve social and economic life. And his work on mental health includes publishing the Depression Report in 2006, which led to the establishment of the UK Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. He co-edited the 2012 World Happiness Report. So we've got it would seem, medically unqualified man simply coming out and telling us what we need for our mental health. I find this deeply, deeply worrying. And if we have a look at the initiative itself. Here we can see how closely embedded it is with the parliamentary system. This is one of the Westminster Committee rooms, the Mindfulness Initiative. And we called them today to say, are there any risks? And they directed us to this page on their website, which is it for sorry, we're there. Yeah. Is it for anyone? And if I focus in on this, what have we got here? Well, basically, we're seeing that they are saying on occasion participants in meditation groups or retreats report unusual or unexpected experiences. This can prompt a variety of reactions, from curiosity at one end of the scale to concern or distress at the other. So they are admitting here that mindfulness can cause, quote, distress. And they go on to say that people who are not fully qualified should not be giving this teaching. But of course, this is psychotherapy, which has no proper regulation anyway. So we said, well, have they conducted some form of risk analysis? Has the All-Party Parliamentary Group conducted risk analysis on mindfulness? We were told the answer was no. But down here in the small print, part of the responsibility for this so-called risk, which doesn't exist, is passed back here to the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. My goodness, it gets more interesting because they are visioning a world where mindfulness enables greater awareness, understanding, compassion, wisdom, and responsiveness. How do we survive, Mike, for thousands of years without Oxford University and mindfulness? And if you really want to see the key parts, they want to get mindfulness worldwide. They want us to be able to realise our human potential, which of course we couldn't do without Oxford University. They want to embody mindfulness in all that we do, and they want to be practising the change we would like to see.
Who's we?
I think that's they.
Yeah.
And we've looked on their website, no clear risk analysis on mindfulness, although, as we've seen, harmful effects are recognised. We spoke to them on the phone. We've been invited to make contact by email to see what risk analysis they've done.
There's something which is never really covered is suicides in young people. And I just wonder how much of this type of psychological, I'm going to use the word attack,
manipulation,
is how much responsibility people like this have for this type of unfortunate result in young people.
My personal opinion, just my opinion, but my opinion is that this type of manipulation of people's minds, where the trainers who are not qualified, they're not clinical psychologists, they're not trained psychiatrists, where at least you have some regulation, some form of standards being imposed. These are psychotherapists. Anybody can do the course, put the plate up on the wall. Then they're going into schools, manipulating the minds of youngsters. They have no idea if there's any underlying mental health issue with any of those children. This is very, very dangerous stuff. We've mentioned schools, so we might as well bring in this, and thank you for viewers north of the border. Here we are, mindfulness in Scotland. Not only is it going to be looking at enhancing the well-being of the people of Scotland, this is going directly into schools. I've just pointed out the little icon there because several people have contacted me this morning to say, we think this is a cult. I've no way of knowing, but I don't like the look of it. There's a little person with roots growing up into a tree.
Yeah, and the upstretched hands. You'll see the upstretched hands in so many of these types of websites in some form in their logos.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we'll let other people research that, but our point is, who are these people that are going into schools, playing with the minds of young children? No risk analysis on this site either. But when I went looking for who these people were, who is Mindfulness Scotland, it brought me to a housing estate. There is no named individual, there's no telephone number, there's just an address, an email address, and the address on a housing estate in Glasgow. So these are the people being given the responsibility to play with the minds of our children and young people. And as you say, Mike, we're watching this dramatic increase in suicide rates amongst young people. Can I just very quickly have an eye on the time? We've got a couple of other things to bring in, if we can today, Alex. But this is dangerous stuff, which is being peddled out of sight of the wider public.
It is, Brian, and we were talking about the chancers earlier. There's some chancers in Bears Den. I think they've seen how they can make a quick buck out of this. It's a very well-to-do neighbourhood, and you can see what's going on there is that they're onto a good thing. I see that a chat box viewer, Neil P, has said that we're immensely ignorant on this subject and we're not psychologically trained. Well, Neil, I have to say that we're human beings and we're created to recognise evil when we see it. We have instincts for a reason. Brian and Mike, and in a lesser way I, have followed a lot of evil over many years, and if it doesn't smell right, there's something nasty behind it. That's what the human being is capable of working out, really. Never mind psychological and psychiatric qualifications. This is wrong, and it never gets more visceral than when you're looking at the intentions people have towards your children. And if you do not like the way that people are behaving towards your children, then that's a very strong alarm bell.
The one point I would make here, Alex, is that when we talk about this subject, and we're talking about not just mindfulness, we're talking about the gay agenda, or we're talking about gender agenda, or the way the media is being used, we're talking about the way these subjects have been weaponized. They've been weaponized for political purposes, for a political policy agenda. And this is something quite different to being used for therapeutic use. And that's the key point here, I think.
It's absolutely the point, and some people seem to find it remarkably difficult to understand that you can have a technique, put it in the hands of a particularly callous political agenda, and you've got something particularly dangerous. But we're going to stay on, we're not today, but in future programs we're going to be talking about this, because this is a massive agenda which is breaking out right the way across the country. And who voted? Did we see a vote in Parliament for mindfulness in schools? Have we had a referendum on mindfulness in schools? No, we haven't. But a policy has been made by a group of people who have themselves been subjected to mindfulness. This is La La Land. Well, let's have an advert for the British Constitution Group event, 22nd of April. Got my glasses on today, Mike, we'll be okay. So the key point of this is the programme for this should be out today. The idea is to provide workshops so that a number of subjects can be covered. This is very free, very flexible. It's not for the British Constitution Group to be speaking to people in a set piece conference. This is about people coming together and able to share their information amongst themselves. £10 tickets, and the tickets are for sale in advance. We are being told by the hall that it will not necessarily be possible for people to get in just by buying a ticket on the door. There's some security implications to this. So if you haven't got a ticket, we advise you to buy a ticket in advance. And I'll also just say that we've got Ian Crane's AV8 coming up, 19th to the 22nd of May. I will be one of the speakers at that, and I'll be particularly talking on the transformational Newspeak agenda, which is to be warning about some of these mind-changing techniques which are now being used.
Right, we want to end on this, and I do apologise I didn't animate the. We weren't supposed to see the punchline.
The hypocrite.
Yes.
Well, if it sticks, we might as well show it. I
yes.
suppose,
So this is Sam Gyimah. He is the prisons minister, and he was speaking a day or two ago to the Independent Monitoring Board, who of course monitor prisons in the UK. He said he was delighted to be there at the Independent Monitoring Board's national conference and have the opportunity to meet so many of them. He said, ensuring, this is almost the first thing he said in his speech, ensuring those who are detained by the state receive decent and humane treatment is essential. That's what he said. It's absolutely essential. And I just wanted to remind everybody that Melanie Shaw is still receiving the most obscene, inhumane treatment at HMP Foston Hall. And so therefore, perhaps some people may wish to contact Sam Gyimah and perhaps ask him what he's talking about, because if he believes that those detained by the state should receive decent and humane treatment, if he believes that that is essential, then why does that not apply to Melanie Shaw? Well, we know the reason why, but he perhaps might like to comment.
And I would encourage people to take up that challenge and make contact with this man. They are able to do what they do or don't do simply by the fact that wider public don't take action. Yeah. That brings us to the end of today's news. Alex, we'll just close. Thank you very much for joining us. Really excellent reports there from Holland, not the sort of thing that we've able to see on the BBC. And I'll just remind people that we've got the UK Column local meeting in the George Hotel, Plympton tonight. So if you're able to travel a little bit and come and see us, we'd be delighted to meet up. And as always, thank you to the people donating. If you're not a subscriber of UK Column, please consider doing that, because we can only do this with your help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.